Revealed, 3 spine-chilling true summer vacation stories that will haunt your dreams forever. The Johnson family sat around their kitchen table, excitement buzzing in the air as they made plans for their long-awaited summer getaway. Mark, a dedicated father in his late 30s, had his pulse racing at the thought of sun-soaked days and laughter-filled nights with Sarah, his nurturing wife, and their 2 kids, Emma and Jake. After years of corporate grind in their peaceful suburb of Maplewood, they finally had a chance to escape. But just as they readied themselves for freedom, an eerie chill whispered through the air. Sarah's fingers trembled as she prepared sandwiches, brushing off strange rustling sounds outside. "Just the wind," she muttered, though unease coiled within her abdomen. Meanwhile, Mark felt the shadows twist ominously between the trees just beyond their backyard. He swallowed hard, attributing it to overworked nerves, but a sense of dread simmered under his skin. The comforting familiarity of their home now felt like a fragile bubble, one that could burst at any moment under an unseen weight. Outside, neighbors strolled past with shadowy expressions, their gazes lingering on the driveway where a local homeless man stared, his hollow eyes boring into their very souls. The next morning, the Johnsons loaded their bags into their car, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in Maplewood. As they drove away, whispers filled the quiet streets. Neighbors peered into their windows with furtive glances, scrutinizing their shiny new vehicle and the promotion Mark had worked so hard for. The Johnsons had always been a model family, but now the fabric of their perfect image began to fray. Something ugly bubbled beneath the surface of their idyllic life, like a splinter in polished wood. Days passed in the mountains, but even the crisp, fresh air couldn't dispel Mark's growing disquiet. Hollow laughter echoed through their cozy cabin, yet news of petty thefts back home twisted in his gut. Nothing to worry about, he tried to tell himself, frustration surfacing at the trivial worries. But beneath the surface, darker shadows emerged. A memory from their past, repressed anger, and rage came creeping back. Someone felt wronged, angry at the way their life had crumbled while the Johnsons thrived. Upon their return, dread gripped Mark's heart as he saw a neighbor's truck blocking their driveway. The welcome sights of Maplewood morphed into a sinister display of hostility. Faces once familiar twisted in suspicion and hostility, revealing a community painted in darker shades. Frantic whispers filled the air, cold and chilling, catching Mark off guard. "What is going on?" he shouted, his heart pounding as he sought some semblance of understanding. But the answers eluded him as cold glances pierced through the twilight. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. A chilling silence fell over the street as Mark's family squeezed together, their solidarity offering little comfort against the encroaching unknown. The atmosphere thickened, each heartbeat echoing louder as they peered into the faces of once friendly neighbors now twisted with something darker. Every assumption, every smile, shattered under the weight of unspoken grievances. The Johnsons found themselves caught in a vicious spiral of mistrust, the very essence of their lives turned upside down. As the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows danced through the darkness, urging the Johnsons to wonder, could they truly find their way back home, or was this just the beginning of a nightmare that threatened to consume them whole? Mark's heart raced as he stood frozen, taking in the sight of their neighbors gathering like shadows, their eyes set like daggers. He could feel Sarah's trembling hand clutching his arm, instinctively seeking reassurance. But reassurance felt like a ghost, slipping further away with every accusing glance thrust in their direction. "Maybe we should just go inside?" Sarah suggested, her voice barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of uncertainty. Emma and Jake huddled close, confusion etched onto their faces. The summer bliss they had anticipated was dissolving into an icy dread, but before Mark could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "You think you can just leave us?" It was Mr. Grady, the once respected figure of the community. The wrinkles around his eyes deepened with anger. "You think we haven't noticed? You fled, like you had something to hide." Mark's throat tightened. "We didn't flee. We went on vacation. This isn't fair." "Fair? Fair?" Mr. Grady scoffed. "You have everything, don't you? A new house, a perfect life. While others struggle to pay bills." His words dripped with venom, echoing the resentment that had festered in their seemingly idyllic neighborhood. The cloud of hostility gathered thick and dark. Mark could see the embers of something terrifying igniting in the neighbor's eyes. Fear began clawing at his insides. Could resentment turn to violence? He scanned the gathered crowd, each face a grim reminder of the unease that had snaked into their home since they returned. "Let's just go," Mark urged Sarah, who nodded but didn't move. The weight of their neighbors' gazes pinned them down like stakes through soft earth. Suddenly, a shrill scream cut through the tension, echoing from deeper within Maplewood. The crowd shifted, a collective tension unraveling as a young girl burst from her yard, tears streaming. "They took him. They took Tommy." "Who took him?" Mark shouted, instinctively stepping forward, compelled by the instinct to protect. But the ripple of fear pulsed through the crowd, eyes darted to the darkness just outside the neighborhood. "The man! The man by the trees!" She cried out. As soon as the words left her lips, the wind twisted through the street, carrying the overbearing silence but only for a moment. The hushed whispers amongst the neighbors grew frantic. There was a man lurking between the trees, one that everyone avoided, a local legend brought to life, someone whose eyes were said to hold the secrets of the abandoned. The realization drummed heavily in Mark's chest. "Sarah," he said, dread lacing his voice, "we need to get inside now." But before they could retreat, shadows moved at the edge of the light, fleeting figures darting in and out of view. Mark's heart thudded a frantic rhythm. He grasped his family, guiding them back toward the flickering porch light that felt increasingly dim against the darkness. "Why is no one helping?" Jake cried, voice quaking with fear. Mark's gaze flitted from neighbor to neighbor, the monster of mistrust holding them captive. The echoes of the girl's screams curled around his mind, rooting him in place. As they reached their front door, something in the distance caught his eye, a figure standing still under the canopy of trees, watching. Before Mark could react, a sharp sound pierced the air, a crack of a branch snapping underfoot. "Get inside." But the door swung wide. Only to discover something waiting on the other side, what had emerged from the shadows. And what did it want from the Johnsons? The tightness in Mark's belly fluttered. Could the night have brought something more sinister than they ever imagined? The tremble of footsteps beckoned them forth. The door swung open, feet nearly stumbling over the threshold. What awaited them was not a neighbor or a missed friend, but a gaping void where the warmth of home should have been. The porch light flickered, casting erratic shadows upon the walls. Mark squinted into the darkness. It felt like the air thickened, as if the very night conspired against them. "Mom? Dad?" Emma's small voice trembled, and the words hung in the air like an uninvited guest. The space before them loomed empty, the familiar only now an echo. Mark's heart hammered as his eyes darted back to the figure lurking in the shadows of the trees. "Stay close, kids," he whispered, pulling Sarah, Jake, and Emma near. But the promise of safety felt like a lie. The figure melted away, lost in the thickening dark. The streetlight buzzed angrily, light flickering from one second to the next, and a chill whispered across their skin. They hesitated, caught in an unseen web of fears. "What if we just left?" Sarah murmured, her voice tight. "Where would we go?" Mark replied, barely above a growl. "We can't abandon our home. Not now." As he spoke, the eerie stillness grew thicker, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. A rustling noise disrupted their thoughts, soft, deliberate, inching closer like a predator. "Listen." Jake exclaimed, a note of sheer terror creeping into his voice. The rustling intensified, almost rhythmic, as if something was preparing to pounce. Mark's instincts kicked in. Inside now. He shoved his family through the door, slamming it shut behind them. The lock clicked, a stark and unforgiving sound, the familiar scent of the living room, the worn couch, the faintest hint of air freshener did little to reassure him. In the dim light, every corner transformed, shadows dancing menacingly against the walls. What about Tommy? Emma's voice broke the suffocating silence, her face pale as she clutched her sister's hand. What if he's not okay? The weight of her words crashed over them. We can't just leave him, Mark said, horror rolling through him. That little boy was a reflection of the neighborhood they once thought safe. But stepping back outside felt like diving into an abyss. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed outside, slamming against the door as if someone wanted to be let in. The children jumped, and Sarah squeezed Mark's arm, her nails digging in. What's happening? I don't know. He gritted through clenched teeth, heart thundering in his ears. Another violent knock reverberated through the house. Mark. It was Mr. Grady, panic threading through his words. Let me in. There's something out here. Stay away. Mark yelled, instinctively pushing his family further back. They huddled in a tight cluster, fear coursing like electricity between them. Then came the whispers, low, chilling murmurings that bled through the cracks in the door, creeping closer until it felt like they seeped directly into his mind. Just out of sight, a shape darted past the window, a flash of movement too quick to comprehend, sending a wave of panic surging through Mark's veins. What is this? He breathed, eyes wide with disbelief. Dad! Jake shouted, raising a trembling finger. Mark turned, eyes wide, just as the darkness beyond the door rippled, and an even larger shadow unlocked from obscurity. Something emerged, something that was not just a man by the trees, but something unnatural altogether. The eyes piercing, like twin beacons fixed on them through the glass, and an unearthly smile stretched across its face. Mark's body froze. Mark, what do we do? Sarah trembled as the children clung to her sides, fear etched on their small faces. The figure pushed against the glass, mouth opening slowly, revealing a darkness that threatened to engulf them all. In that moment, as the breath caught in Mark's throat, he understood, this wasn't just a haunting. They needed to confront the unknown or face something worse than any nightmare they could envision. The figure loomed closer, lips curling into a grin that cut deep. But when the light flickered again, would it still be there? What other truths lay hidden behind the shadows? The room pulsed with a silence that made the heart race. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears as the figure lingered, a gaping maw radiating a cold that threatened to swallow them whole. The glass pane seemed to thin, vibrating with the figure's ominous presence. Shut your eyes. Mark suddenly shouted. He didn't know if it would help, but he needed to make a command, to assert some kind of control. The children instinctively obeyed, burying their faces into their mother's coat. The whispers grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of distant cries and laughter twisted into something grotesque. Mark squeezed his eyes shut, wishing he could silence them. He could feel his heart beating like a wild animal in his chest, desperate to escape. Sarah was shaking beside him. What if it's trying to get in? She whispered, her voice trembling with each syllable. Just breathe. We'll figure this out, he managed, even as panic licked at his insides. The weight of impending doom loomed. Mark opened his eyes only to find the silhouette hadn't budged, still relentless in its insidious observation. It shifted slightly, and just at that moment, the door vibrated violently, rattling against the frame. Mark! I see it! Came Mr. Grady's frantic voice from the other side. It didn't sound like the man they knew. You have to let me in. Please. The children recoiled. Emma's small body trembled as she muttered, I don't want it to get in, Dad. Mark felt a cold rush of dread course through him. How far away were the sounds of the world outside? Had they always been safe here, or were they only hiding from something worse? Stay back! He yelled, realizing the echo of Mr. Grady's voice sounded different now, cloaked in the same unnatural cadence as the figure at the door. It's not safe. Just then, the darkness that draped the front window writhed, as if it had a mind of its own. The figure twisted and contorted, weaving through the shadows of the room with the grace of a predator. Even as Mark tried to take a step, he felt a paralysis clutch at him, bolting him in place. "Dad, please," Jake whimpered. "I don't want to stay here. Listen to me." Mark forced himself to meet the eyes of each child. "We need to get to the basement. We'll be safe there." "Why the basement?" Sarah's voice was a whisper, fear giving her a trembling quality. "Because it has no windows. It's south the safest place." He snatched the nearest flashlight from the table, flicking it on as the beam dipped and danced wildly in the thickening shadows. "On my count. 1, 2." The knocking escalated, relentless and furious, as if the very house was under siege. The figure's face stretched into a grotesque grin again, impossibly wide, as if it found a perverse joy in their fear. 3. Mark careened towards the hallway, the children following closely behind. He flicked the light again, chasing away the dark momentarily. Each step echoed unnaturally, the hollowness of their home morphing into something else, a waiting predator. "Go! Go!" he shouted, nearly tumbling down the stairs as they reached the door to the basement. With every ounce of strength, he shoved it open, pulling his family into the pitch blackness. The door slammed shut behind them, a finality that breathed apprehension. Within the darkness, Mark fumbled for the old lantern atop the dusty workbench. His breath came in short gasps, accompanied by the pounding of his own heart, racing against the silence. Outside, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices now driving sharp blades of dread through the air. In that moment of desperation, a thought struck him: the shadows had been watching. But what were they waiting for? The lantern flickered to life, and as the dim glow cut through the blackness, the faces of his children appeared like ghostly apparitions. They were pale, wide-eyed, breathless. "Is it gone?" Sarah's voice wavered, caught between hope and despair. Mark opened his mouth to respond, to offer some comforting lie, but he froze as a chill ran down his spine. The door rattled once more, not from the outside, but from right behind them. Something was there. What had they locked away? And the question hung like a noose, heavy and tight: what would they face when they finally turned to confront the darkness behind them? The lantern cast a frail glow, flickering like Mark's nerves. He pointed it towards the sound, his hands shaking as dread knotted in his stomach. The rattling persisted, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of his fear. It enveloped them, an inescapable cloak of terror. "Stay here," he whispered, raising the lantern to illuminate the cramped corners of the basement. Emma's fingers grasped at his pant leg, her small face twisted in fright. "No, Dad. Don't go." "I have to check," he replied, his voice trembling. It felt wrong to reassure and command at the same time, but he had to lead them. He had to show them that he could handle whatever was creeping in the shadows. The door creaked open just enough to slip through. Mark peered around the threshold, the dim light pooling just at his feet. The basement was a graveyard of old boxes, broken toys, and remnants of a family's past. Behind him, the quiet whimpers of his children grew louder. In the stillness, he felt something shift. A sensation crept up his spine, eyes on him. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it had weight, pulling at him, urging him to step further inside. With the lantern extended, he moved cautiously. Suddenly, the lantern flickered off, plunging him into a dark chasm. Panic clawed at his throat. He fumbled, twisting the base, but it only sputtered once, then died. Now he was truly alone. "Mark!" came Sarah's frightened call from the other side of the threshold. What is going on? Just hold on, he stammered, forcing his feet to move. Between the rows of boxes, shadows danced as if they had taken on a life of their own. He could feel their breath, a chill that seeped into his bones. Then he heard it, a whisper so low it gathered in his ears, a voice that beckoned him deeper into the darkness. "Mark, help me!" A shiver swept over him. It wasn't he, his children. This voice was older, more insidious, twisting. "Help you?" He dared to whisper, uncertain if he was losing his mind. "Mark, I'm waiting." Moments passed, trembling breaths filling the void as he fought the urge to rush back to the door and barricade himself with his family. Instead, curiosity bled into his fear, urging him to follow the voice into the abyss. After all, wasn't he that what it wanted? To lure him in? "Who are you?" he managed, voice barely above a whisper. "Remember me?" the voice taunted, echoing in his mind. "You left me." His heart sank. Memories of a night long ago surfaced, an abandoned child's laughter mixed with shadows that had once played in his dreams, now clawing at him for attention. A quick glance back showed the outline of his children watching through the doorway, eyes wide with confusion and fear. He took a steadying breath, too aware of the gaze settling upon him from the unseen depths. This was a manipulation, a ploy to unravel him. "Stay back!" Mark shouted, a rare surge of courage flooding him. He pivoted, the empty silence closing around him. What had he stirred? Then, behind the boxes, a shape emerged, a grotesque mimicry of a child, eyes glimmering with malice. It wasn't he, his daughter, nor his son, but a mockery of innocence designed to ensnare. "Help me," Mark it pleaded seamlessly, lips curling back into a familiar smile, twisted in malice. He dashed back towards the door, heart hammering, just as the shadows lunged. "Get away from my kids!" he roared, slamming the door shut as he shoved his back against it. Bracing, breathless, he turned slowly, only to see his children standing wide-eyed, fear etched deep on their faces. "Is it gone?" Jake whispered. Mark's mind raced. He didn't know. But even as he stared into the hearts of his children, dread pooled once more, for he doubted they had seen the last of the horror that lingered. What else was waiting unseen, hungry for the light? The darkness pressed in, a threat wrapping around them like a serpent. And right outside, a knock echoed ominously against the basement door. What if it was not just taunting? What if there were more than one? Mark barely registered the sound of the knock. He stood frozen, heart sinking further with each pulse. His children clung to him, their breaths rapid. "What was that?" Emma whimpered, her small frame trembling against him. "It's nothing," he lied, forcing his voice to steady. He didn't believe it himself. The dark was alive here, vibrating with an energy that clawed at his sanity. Shadows twisted and writhed, lurking behind every box, waiting for him to look away. "Dad!" Jake's voice broke through his thoughts, eyes widening as he stared at the door. "What if it's we don't know what it is, all right?" Mark snapped. He regretted the sharpness when he saw Jake flinch. "We have to stay quiet. Just listen." The knocking came again, heavier this time. A weighty thud that rattled their bones. It didn't seem to come from the door, but rather from somewhere deeper in the basement, as if the very walls were trying to speak. "Help me!" Mark's blood chilled. The voice had returned, echoing in his mind like an old friend reminding him of things better left forgotten. But that little girl, was she real? Or just another ghost conjured to prey on his guilt? He couldn't linger in the doorway. Uncertainty churned in his gut as he glanced at his children, exhales shaky yet determined. They trusted him to protect them, and there was no way he could lead them out, not with the shadows closing in. "Stay close to me," he instructed, swallowing the tremor in his throat. With a deep breath, he opened the door just a crack, shining the dim light through. Darkness stared back, indomitable and thick. But it was their terrified faces that pushed him forward. He stepped inside, every sense screaming that something wasn't right. The knocking intensified, now sounding like frantic hands clawing at the walls. "Please, help me." It was so familiar. Mark thought of the memories he tried to choke down, a childhood lost and misplaced laughter. He took a step deeper, guided by something he couldn't resist. "Mark." Sarah's voice jolted him back. He turned, and in her gaze, he saw the fear morph into something more profound, dread that he hadn't failed only his kids but something much darker. The shape behind the boxes, a looming horror that had called to him, threatened them all. "Get back!" He roared again, wide-eyed, back against the wall, heart racing as he shoved the door closed behind him. The house jolted as if it held its breath. Footsteps echoed in the silence, slow and deliberate, like the stalking predator it had become. Mark could feel them inch closer, could sense the eyes boring into him from the shadows, then, like a crack of lightning, the door rattled violently. "Mark, let me in," the voice pleaded, soft yet sinister, just as before. He was losing it. He couldn't let it in, whatever it was that had once been innocent. "Don't." He held up the lantern, glaring at the door. Light flickered, but the darkness didn't retreat. And just as he thought he could breathe again, a scratching sound reverberated on the wood, inching closer. "I'm not going back, I want to let you," he whispered, each word a reminder of promises he'd made long ago, but with a sudden crash, the door burst inward, slamming into the wall, revealing a void of swirling shadows. Mark's lantern sputtered, casting long, trembling beams that illuminated parts of the nightmare they had awoken, and then he saw them, figures moving in the darkness, shapes shifting and writhing like a river of malice. All echoing the same chilling voice that blamed him, that begged him. They were not just reflections of the past, they were embodiments of his guilt, rising for some kind of reckoning. As the darkness closed in, Mark fought to keep hold of his sanity, yet what was outside was only a whisper away. What if the noise was a warning? What if the moment he let his guard down, they would come for him, for his children? Mark backed up, trembling, mind racing. He had no way of knowing what would happen next, but he could sense it in his bones. The true horror was yet to reveal itself, and then, as the shadows moved forward, he realized he had only begun to scratch the surface of this terror. What had he truly unleashed? Because right behind them, something slithered, waiting to break free. Mark's heart thudded in his chest, each beat a heavy reminder of the terror closing in around them. The lantern flickered weakly, barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into eerie shapes, mocking his fear. "Dad!" Jake cried, his voice laced with sheer panic. The figures, those manifestations of guilt and regret, advanced like an ominous tide, whispering promises of despair. "Don't move!" Mark shouted, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring, holding the lantern before him as if it could repel the onslaught. But he could feel the darkness, a living, breathing thing eager to engulf them. "Mark, you have to let me in." The voice from beyond, twisted and pleading, sent icy fingers crawling up his spine. It was impossible to discern the source, but the pain in the tone made him hesitate. Was it truly a cry for help or a trap meant to ensnare him? "Stop!" he roared, but the shadows only surged forward, filling the room with their suffocating presence. Despite his words, a part of him grappled with the thought, what if letting it in meant saving someone? What if he could quiet the ghosts? "Please help me," the voice came again, insistent, weaving through the chaos, threading itself into the fabric of his nightmares. A sudden jolt of fear pulsed through him. What if it was one of the children's voices? What if it was Emma? The thought lit a flame of dread in his gut. He turned quickly, scanning for his kids. They were close, huddled beneath the thin light of the lantern, their faces pale, eyes wide and terrified. "We can't let it out," he said, his voice breaking as he fought to keep himself together. "It isn't what it seems. It will hurt us." The darkness whispered back, weaving around him like smoke. The silhouette slithered forward, creeping toward him, almost curious, shapes of his past clawing at the edges of his mind. They were the lost, the forgotten, his failures incarnate. Mark, that voice again, threaded with familiar echoes. It was indistinct, lost in the cacophony of grief and guilt. He swallowed hard, forcing his attention away. He had to fight. He wouldn't let it consume him. "Stay behind me," he hissed at his children, stepping between them and the creeping shadows. He felt a brief flicker of courage in the face of his own fears. As he stepped further back, the door behind them creaked. Had he locked it? He didn't remember. But there, in the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a figure emerging from the darkness that slithered like smoke across the floor. "Mark, let me in," it rasped again, words dripped with a thick, sinister sweetness. It rose, twisting and contorting, its shape ever changing. Something deep within the shadows resonated with his memories, memories he wished to bury. "Please, just one touch," it whispered, seductive. He could almost feel its cold breath on his skin. "No!" he screamed, the lantern flickering violently as he raised it high, illuminating the figures around him. They recoiled, shrieking as if burned. But it was merely a momentary reprieve. The darkness clawed louder, more insistently. "Keep it away!" Sarah shouted, jumping in front of their children as the shadows writhed closer, suddenly electrified by the resistance. The abyss responded, pulsating as if it resumed its countenance of desire. Then, in a moment that stretched like an eternity, Mark heard a high-pitched scream, a scream that stripped his heart raw. It was Emma. Was she in danger? He spun around, panic seizing him. The lantern dimmed again, shadows swirling unpredictably. "We can't let it take her," he shouted. But the shadows thickened, voices merging into a deafening chorus, mingling with the cries from his daughter. Everything felt like it was unraveling. The children were the light. They had to stay safe. But what if the only way to keep them safe was to confront the darkness? With a determined resolve, Mark took a step forward. "Get out! Leave my family alone!" he yelled, voice echoing through the basement, surrounded by smothering darkness. But then, from within the shadows, something coarse slithered. Closer, its intent clear as it drew nearer to him. Closer. What awaited him in the depths of that darkness? Was it too late to turn back? As the darkness pulsed with life, Mark braced himself. The true test had just begun. The shadows recoiled slightly, but only for a moment. Then, they surged back, a torrent of despair swallowing the meager light from the lantern. Mark's heart raced, each pulse pounding in rhythm with the dark promises that slithered around him. Gripping the lantern tighter, he peered into the suffocating inky void, trying to discern shapes from the darkness, faces that he prayed were just figments of his imagination. The air grew thick, dense and suffocating, as if it was charged with an electric fury. "We have to go!" Sarah screamed, her voice crackling through the shadows, radiating a raw desperation that echoed Mark's own terror. He turned to his children, feeling the warmth of their bodies pressed against him, a fragile barrier against the unknown. Their faces, eyes wide with terror, cheeks smeared with grime from the panicked crawl through the basement, reflected his own dread. "Stay close to me," he urged, though fear clawed at his throat. The voice returned, closer this time, a sinister caress that thrilled and chilled in equal measure. "Mark, let me show you." It slipped through the air like tendrils of mist, brushing against his ear, urging him forward. He thrashed against the urge, against the cruel temptation to step closer. "Don't listen!" Jake shouted, his small frame trembling. "It's a trick." It felt right, but that dread gnawed at him, wrapping around his insides like a serpent. Mark could sense it. The voice spoke with an intimacy that could shatter every resolve he had. Mark, the figure now loomed just beyond the flicker of the lantern. Shadows clung to it like a second skin, weaving in and out of sight, a haunting silhouette that called to him. "Whatever it is, we have to leave." Sarah shouted again. "Now!" But something deep within him hesitated. Wait! What if before he could finish, a cacophony erupted around them? The shadows reacted violently, twisting and merging into a swirling mass of despair. The screams soared, wrapping around them with an oppressive weight, as Mark felt the walls of the basement corrode with fear. He took a step back, retreating instinctively. "I said, get out. Dad." Emma's voice pierced the shadowy veil like a flare, fragmented and shaky. The darkness swelled, pulsing violently at the sound. "Help. No!" Mark roared, finally bursting forth toward the cry, lantern aloft, illuminating the pool of gloom. The shadows recoiled as if struck, but they quickly regained their strength. The walls around them trembled, and the air chilled further as it dripped with the memories of those lost to despair. Suddenly, the basement could have been any room where darkness thrived. The walls filled with faces he recognized and faces he had buried. Their eyes were blank but hungry. Mark felt each gaze linger on him, pressing his flesh, pushing him toward guilt. One whisper slipped through, dripping with despair and familiarity. A woman's voice he had summoned into his nightmares. The lantern flickered again, dangerously weak, casting twisted shadows across his family. "Get back!" he cried, but the shadows were too hungry, reaching for his children, spindly fingers inching too close, poised to pull them into the void. "Mark, save us!" came the haunting chorus, echoing from every corner. "No! I want tea!" he shouted, swinging the lantern wildly, the flickering light severing some of the chilling darkness momentarily. But as he beamed it toward the shifting forms, hope flickered like the lantern itself. He stepped closer to the darkest point, where no light dared trespass. "You're not real." "Am I?" the voice asked, seductive and familiar, like a lullaby from childhood. "You know the truth." Cold dread cascaded through Mark's veins. What truth? His heart raced, visions of anguished faces flashed through his mind. Were they here to save or torment him? As another scream rang out, Emma's scream, his resolve tightened. "Leave my family alone," he demanded, feeling a spark of determination dance through the fear, but the shadows surged, a dark wave crashing upon him, dragging him into their embrace. Would he face the darkness or become part of it? With every inch he was pulled in, that chilling whisper coiled around him tighter. Come on, Mark, join us. What awaited him if he let go? What would happen to his family? A shiver shot down his spine as the shadows closed in, an unending abyss waiting to swallow him whole. The shadows consumed him, a suffocating blanket of despair that wrapped around his limbs, pulling him deeper into its malevolent embrace. Mark felt the lantern slipping from his grasp, its light flickering like a dying ember, fighting against the tide of darkness. "Mark! Don't let it take you." Sarah's voice cut through, desperate and raw. She reached for him, her small hand brushing against his, a tether to reality that nearly slipped away in the suffocating dark. With every ounce of will, he fought against the encroaching void. "I'm here. I'm coming." He yanked himself back, feeling the oppressive weight of the shadows pull angrily. They whispered promises of comfort, of understanding, of answers to the questions he had buried long ago. But he couldn't. Not while his family stood at the edge of this malevolence. "Let her go!" Jake yelled, eyes wide with fear, watching as the darkness lunged hungrily toward Emma, who was now sobbing in the tight clench of the shadows. Her struggling form fought back against the icy tendrils, but they only tightened, swallowing her small figure in a menace that chilled Mark's bones. In a fleeting moment, he glimpsed her frightened eyes, vivid blue, like a bright beacon in the encroaching devouring night. A raw instinct ignited within him, burning through the despair. "I won't lose you." He surged forward, adrenaline surging through his veins as he swung the lantern, its weak beam cutting and slicing at the dark. The shadows hissed, recoiling momentarily, as though struck. Emma's outline became clearer, her body shuddering against the grip of despair. "Dad!" she screamed, and the sound pierced the air, jarring Mark back into resolve. "Hold on." His hand closed around the lantern, pulling it close like a shield. Light sprang up, a fragile barrier against the dark. "I'm coming." But the thing that loomed in the depths of the shadows pulsed and writhed. It took a step forward, and Mark felt the ground beneath him tremble. It was no longer just darkness, it was a shape, an entity that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "Mark, join us," it breathed, the voice slithering over him like cold oil. "We can be one. Just let go." "No. You're not real," he shouted, clenching his teeth. "You're nothing. You won't take my family." The lantern flared bright at his command, the glow illuminating the abyss. He reached out toward Emma, each step a battle against the vice of shadows tightening around him, leaving trails of icy dread on his skin. Suddenly, he felt the shadows grip tighter, squeezing around his chest. Cold fingers seeping into his soul. There was an overwhelming sense of loss, slipping away like sand through fingers. "Dad, help!" Emma's voice willed him forward, these echoes igniting a fire within. With renewed strength, he thrust the lantern towards the shadows, imagining it as a warrior charging into battle. The light burst forth, filling the room with brilliance and chaos. The shadows shrieked, recoiling in a wave of furious energy. Faces melted away, replaced by a dark fog, and he saw it for a moment, the emptiness of despair that threatened to swallow everyone whole. "Stay together!" Mark shouted, sensing the walls of the basement beginning to crack around him. Time warped in that instant, the shadows swirling, unsure of themselves before the overwhelming force of light. "Run!" he bellowed, pushing Emma and Jake toward the stairs, every fiber of his being desperate to save them. But those faceless forms still clawed desperately from the darkness, trying to pull him back. Suddenly, in the chaos, Sarah stumbled, falling against the edge of the wall, shadows creeping up her legs. Mark faltered, heart racing, torn between saving his wife and fleeing with the children. "Mark! Help me!" she cried, her voice drenched in fear, vulnerability cutting through the shadows. What choice to make? Could he save one without losing the other? In that split second between family and darkness, everything hung in the balance. As the shadows surged again, thirsting for a final victory, the lantern's light flickered, threatening to extinguish. Once and for all. Would he let one go to save the others? Or could he conquer the darkness for good? The choice loomed, heavy as the shadows themselves. In an eruption of raw instinct, Mark surged forward, words bubbling up in his throat with the urgency of a lifetime. "Sarah! Hold on!" The shadows clamored around her, icy tendrils reaching eagerly toward her panic-stricken face, urging him to abandon hope. But no! Not now. He couldn't let despair win. "Stay back!" he roared, brandishing the lantern like a sword, its flickering beam piercing through the suffocating darkness. The shadows thrashed violently, screams mingling with the whispers that crawled under his skin like insects. The lantern radiated warmth, wrapping around him and his family like an embrace forged from love. "Emma! Jake! Run!" Mark shouted, the urgency of his voice snapping them into motion as they stumbled toward the stairs, longing to escape the encroaching dark. He caught the flicker of their eyes, wide with fear and determination. Their faces propelled him, and he fought against the shadows, feeling their cold breath nipping at his heels. "Wait! No!" Sarah's cry pierced the air, her vulnerability tugging at his heart. Mark froze momentarily. The choice loomed like a shadow itself, dark and oppressive, but he knew with every fiber of his being what he needed to do. "Go!" he yelled, pushing his children forward, heart aching as he cast one last desperate glance at his wife, whose presence shimmered fragile behind the dark veil. "I'll be right behind you. Just go." Without thinking, the sound of her pleas sparked a fire in his chest. "Sarah! Fight!" Mark shouted, forcing the lantern's light into the treacherous dark as it wriggled towards her crumpled form. The shadows reeled, their grip weakening slightly. "Mark! Please!" Her voice trembled, and he could see in her eyes the fear turning to despair as she began to fade into the void. No, he couldn't let that happen. Instead, with all the strength he could muster, he called on every good memory, every moment that bound them as a family. Love, laughter, warmth, the things that defined their lives. Together. He yelled, feeling the heat pulse through him. We're stronger together. The lantern blazed in response, light pouring from it, forming a shield against the dark. He lunged toward the shadows without hesitation. As he brushed against the darkness, he felt it pull at him, clinging to his skin and fabric. I won't lose you, not again. He yelled, fueled by the memories of laughter, birthday candles, and bedtime stories that painted his life. The lantern flickered brighter, a sun in the midst of a storm. Mark, the voice whispered, seductive and light, slipping through the cracks of his resolve. Just let go. The shadows twisted, retreating slightly, confused by the sudden vigor of emotion. No! Mark roared, refusing to yield, eyes fixed on his family. You will not take us. In that moment, he felt the weight of his past and future collide, an outpouring of everything he was, everything they were. We fight for each other. He declared, and he plunged the lantern forward. Its brilliant light bloomed like a supernova, casting the shadows back. A rush of warmth surrounded them, the cold panic of despair fading swiftly as it recoiled. Mark grasped Sarah's hands tightly. We've got this, he said, fire blazing in his calm. Together, remember? With one mighty push, they pulled against the shadows, illuminating the abyss as it began to cave in on itself. The darkness writhed, shrieking like a wounded beast, slowly sucking back into the depths from which it came. Mark could feel the relief flooding his systems as he gathered Sarah beside him, grasping Emma and Jake's trembling hands. Keep running. He urged them again. They didn't need to be told twice. Clutching the lantern tight, they dashed toward the basement door, feeling the warmth amplify with every footfall. The shadows may have tormented them, but they could no longer hold the family captive. As they burst into the hall, the sunlight streamed in through the windows as the frightening shadows retreated into a memory, vanquished and lost. They stumbled into the light, shaking but alive, and Mark turned, one last look behind them. Darkness had shrunk, no longer the monstrous predator it once was. Look at that! Jake said, pointing back down the hallway as sunlight cast a warm glow, illuminating every corner that had once felt menacing. Their home felt safe once more, untouchable. Mark enveloped his family in a tight embrace, heart racing yet filled with relief. I won't let fear rule us again, he promised softly, the sunlight pouring through the windows a symbol of hope, washing away the shadows of their nightmares. We're home, Sarah whispered, her eyes glistening. Mark nodded, squeezing his children tightly against him, feeling their warmth, their lives, their laughter, everything precious, all that mattered. They were home. And together, they had conquered the darkness, and just like that, the shadows began to fade fully from memory, replaced by the laughter and love they had forged in bright and vivid colors. As long as they had each other, they would never be lost again. Now, this is the moment to show your support. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories that will grip your heart. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm, and let me know you're with me. Flood that comment section right now with your reactions and theories about this haunting journey we just took. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Only true fans understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions. Let us keep this community strong.